Imagine walking into a room where you're technically the boss, but the person sitting across from you just signed a check worth more than your entire organization generates in a year. That's not a metaphor. That's the reality swirling around the WNBA right now. Because when Caitlin Clark's reported $50 million Gatorade empire hit the headlines, most fans saw celebration, growth, validation, a breakthrough moment for women's sports. But inside league circles, the reaction may not have been so simple. Money changes dynamics, especially when the money doesn't flow through the league first. For decades, the WNBA operated under a familiar structure. The league was the platform. The league controlled the narrative. The league negotiated the major deals. Players were stars, yes, but within a system that set the limits. Collective identity mattered more than individual dominance. The brand of the league came first. Then Caitlin Clark arrived. Not just as a scorer, not just as a rookie, but as a commercial force the league couldn't contain. The Gatorade partnership wasn't just another endorsement. It didn't feel like a standard rookie marketing agreement. It felt seismic. The kind of deal that signals independence. The kind that says, I don't just play in this league, I move markets. And that's where things get complicated. Because when a single player starts generating numbers that rival the financial footprint of the league itself, control becomes fragile. Suddenly, the question isn't just about basketball. It's about leverage, about authority, about who really holds power when the spotlight gets too bright to manage. Whispers started circulating almost immediately. Not official statements. Not public confrontations. Just quiet tension. Behind closed doors. High-level conversations. Concerns about optics. Concerns about balance. Concerns about what happens when one athlete becomes bigger than the infrastructure built to contain her. The $50 million figure isn't just impressive. It's destabilizing. It exposes a gap between base salaries and endorsement wealth, between veteran contracts and rookie branding power, between the traditional league-first model and the new era of athlete-driven platforms. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Once that gap becomes visible, it can't be hidden again. Fans see it. Sponsors see it. Networks see it. And most importantly, players see it. What happens when the most talked-about athlete in the league earns exponentially more from a single brand partnership than many entire teams earn collectively in salary? What happens when that athlete's personal marketing budget eclipses the league's own promotional campaigns? The narrative shifts. Now, instead of asking whether Caitlin Clark can carry the league, people are asking whether the league can keep up with Caitlin Clark. And that question alone changes everything. Because this isn't just about Gatorade. It's not just about commercials. It's about the beginning of a power realignment. A slow but undeniable shift from institutional control to individual leverage. For years, the WNBA has fought for respect, for visibility, for fair valuation. Now that valuation is exploding, but it's exploding around one central figure. And when growth becomes concentrated instead of distributed, friction follows. Some call it progress. Others call it imbalance. Either way, it's happening. The commissioner now sits at the center of a delicate equation. On one side, record ratings, sold-out arenas, and corporate partnerships fueled by the Caitlin Clark effect. On the other, veteran players navigating a locker room dynamic unlike anything the league has seen before. Because this isn't just about one contract. It's about what that contract represents. It represents autonomy. It represents market demand. It represents a future where the biggest star doesn't need to wait for institutional approval to become global. And institutions don't always adapt gracefully to that kind of disruption. The public sees highlight reels and endorsement campaigns. The insiders see leverage charts and negotiation tables. They see a rookie whose brand might already be more stable than some franchises. They see a player who is, financially speaking, untouchable. That changes how discipline works. It changes how negotiations work. It changes how marketing strategies are designed. It even changes how games are officiated under the microscope of national attention. Because once the market crowns a face of the league can either embrace it, or quietly resist it. And resistance, even subtle resistance, leaves fingerprints. The Gatorade deal was the announcement. But it might also have been the warning shot. A signal that the era of collective modesty is over. That we've entered the age of the mega-athlete in women's basketball. An era where endorsement figures don't just supplement income, they redefine hierarchy. The question isn't whether Caitlin Clark earned the deal. The market answered that clearly. The real question is whether the existing structure was prepared for what that deal would expose. Because when one signature can shake boardrooms, shift sponsorship strategies, and ignite quiet resentment across a league trying to find its balance, you're not looking at a routine endorsement. You're looking at a power shift. And power shifts rarely happen without consequences. This story isn't about a sports drink. It's about what happens when the face of a league becomes a corporation of her own. And the ripple effects are only just beginning. The moment the ink dried, the hierarchy shifted. Not officially. Not in a press release. But in the invisible structure that determines who holds leverage and who asks for permission. Caitlin Clark's reported Gatorade partnership didn't just add endorsement income to her portfolio. It rewrote the internal math of the Wnba. For decades, rookie contracts followed a predictable arc. A top draft pick enters the league. Modest base salary. Gradual endorsement growth. Platform built through years of performance. Authority earned over time. Clark skipped the slow build. Her base Wnba salary? Public record. Modest by professional sports standards. But the endorsement figure floating around? Massive. Multi-year. Market-defining. That contrast is what makes this moment different. Because when a rookie's commercial earnings dwarf her league salary by exponential margins, the source of power becomes obvious. It no longer comes from the team contract. It comes from the outside ecosystem. From brands. From sponsors. From market demand. And that's a structural disruption. The Wnba has historically curated brand access carefully. League-wide sponsors. Coordinated campaigns. Centralized growth strategies. A system designed to ensure collective progress. But Clark's deal didn't feel coordinated. It felt independent. It felt like a declaration that the market could move faster than the league's internal timelines. And once that happens, the control mechanism weakens. This isn't about resentment. It's about precedent. Because if one rookie can secure a deal that rivals decades of gradual growth, what stops the next generational star from bypassing the same system? What stops future agents from negotiating directly at the corporate level instead of aligning first with league strategy? The answer is simple. Nothing. The Gatorade deal signaled that elite talent no longer needs to wait for institutional validation to command global sponsorship money. That realization is powerful and unsettling. The locker room dynamics shift immediately in that environment. Veterans who have spent years building their reputations now share the floor with someone whose commercial valuation eclipses theirs overnight. Not because of seniority, not because of championships, but because the market decided. And markets don't ask for approval. The wealth gap becomes visible in ways that are impossible to ignore. One commercial airing during prime time can generate more income than a season's worth of Wnba salary for most players. That's not speculation. That's structural imbalance. And imbalance creates tension. Even if no one says it out loud. There's also the optics problem. The league has spent years advocating for improved travel standards, expanded marketing budgets, increased player compensation. Progress has come, but gradually. Carefully negotiated. Incrementally improved. Then suddenly, the face of the league is flying private on endorsement-funded travel while the league itself is still navigating charter flight logistics. That image is symbolic. It makes the league look smaller than its biggest star. In corporate terms, that's dangerous. Because sponsors begin to notice where the real momentum is concentrated. They begin to ask themselves a simple question. If one player drives this much engagement, why not invest directly in her instead of negotiating through the league first? That question alone shifts negotiation leverage. It turns the traditional model upside down. Historically, leagues negotiate from strength. They bundle stars together. They offer collective exposure. They maintain centralized power. But when a single athlete becomes the primary driver of rating spikes, merchandise surges, and digital engagement metrics, the balance changes. Now the league needs the player as much as the player needs the league. That's the hierarchy rewrite. And it didn't happen gradually. It happened with one signature. Behind the scenes, executives understand something the public may not fully see yet. A player who generates $50 million in endorsement value operates on a different tier of autonomy. Fines become symbolic. Discipline becomes delicate. Public messaging becomes strategic. Because when the brand attached to that player has more marketing muscle than the league's own campaigns, confrontation becomes risky. The Gatorade deal didn't just elevate Clark's financial standing. It elevated her negotiating position. That's the real shift. Not celebrity. Leverage. Leverage in future contract negotiations. Leverage in scheduling influence. Leverage in broadcast prioritization. Leverage in how the league markets its stars. And once leverage tilts, it rarely resets to neutral. The ripple effect is immediate. Media narratives shift from, "Can she handle the league?" to, "Can the league handle her impact?" That subtle reframing matters. It moves authority from institutional gatekeepers to consumer demand. And consumer demand has been loud. Record viewership numbers. Sold-out arenas. Merchandise spikes. Social media engagement surges. These aren't abstract metrics. They're financial signals. Signals that corporate partners interpret carefully. When Gatorade committed at that level, it wasn't just betting on performance. It was betting on sustained cultural relevance. That's a long-term signal. And long-term signals change boardroom conversations. Suddenly, endorsement negotiations aren't hypothetical projections. They're proof of concept. Proof that women's basketball can command premium sponsorship dollars when positioned around the right figure. But proof also exposes disparity. If one player commands that scale, what does it say about the league's valuation model overall? That question lingers. And it leads directly to a deeper issue. Because while fans celebrated the milestone, executives were forced to confront a reality they may not have anticipated so quickly. The era of controlled growth may be over. The mega-athlete era has arrived. And it arrived faster than the system was prepared for. The signature didn't just secure a sponsorship. It rewrote the hierarchy. And once a hierarchy shifts, the next challenge isn't celebration. It's control. The real tension begins when institutions realize the center of gravity has moved. And that realization was only the beginning. Power in professional sports has always followed a predictable path. The league negotiates the media rights. The league controls the sponsors. The league sets the rules. Players perform within that structure. That model works, until a single player becomes more commercially valuable than the system itself. That's where this situation starts to feel uncomfortable. Because Caitlin Clark's rise didn't just elevate her profile. It exposed a crack in the traditional control model. The WNBA has historically maintained careful oversight over branding access. League-wide sponsorship agreements are designed to protect collective value. Corporate partnerships are often structured to ensure alignment with league messaging and revenue strategy. That's not unusual. That's standard practice. But when Clark secured a deal of this magnitude independently, it sent a signal that the old gatekeeping layers might not matter as much anymore. And that's where control starts slipping. Not publicly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Because once brands realize they can generate historic returns by attaching themselves directly to one athlete, without relying solely on league-negotiated exposure, the negotiation landscape changes permanently. Sponsors begin to ask different questions. Instead of, "How do we partner with the WNBA?" they ask, "How do we align with Caitlin Clark?" That distinction matters. It shifts the center of gravity away from the institution and toward the individual. For decades, leagues have depended on collective branding strength. Even in the NBA, where superstar culture dominates, the league still maintains strong centralized commercial control. But women's basketball has never experienced a commercial moment quite like this. Clark didn't just attract attention. She redefined valuation. Her games drove ratings spikes. Her presence influenced ticket sales across opposing arenas. Social media impressions followed her name like a magnet. And sponsors are data-driven. They don't operate on sentiment. They operate on numbers. If the numbers show that one athlete delivers disproportionate return on investment, they will follow that athlete. That's not personal. It's business. But business realities often clash with institutional pride. Because when the largest commercial momentum in your league flows through one individual brand, you lose the ability to distribute attention evenly. You can try to balance it. You can highlight other stars. You can emphasize parity. But markets rarely respond to forced narratives. They respond to demand. And demand has been overwhelmingly clear. This creates a strategic dilemma. If the league embraces Clark fully as the central commercial engine, it risks reinforcing the idea that the WNBA revolves around one player. If it resists that concentration, it risks suppressing the very force driving record growth. That's not an easy decision. Especially when media rights deals are now in play. The league recently secured a massive broadcast agreement reportedly valued around $2 billion. That's historic. That's progress. But behind closed doors, industry observers understand that valuation doesn't happen in a vacuum. Network executives don't pay premium prices without projected growth drivers. And Clark is widely considered one of the most powerful growth drivers the league has ever seen. That creates pressure. Because if the media valuation was influenced heavily by her impact, the league now faces an uncomfortable equation. The product's financial future may be disproportionately linked to one name. Institutions don't like that dependency. Dependency weakens negotiation strength. Imagine sitting at the negotiating table knowing that one athlete's injury, trade, or absence could materially affect ratings projections. That's leverage. And leverage belongs to whoever can influence the outcome. Clark doesn't need to threaten anything. She doesn't need to demand anything. Her presence alone creates negotiating weight. That's what makes this different. She's not just a high-scoring rookie. She's a revenue variable. And revenue variables shift power. This is where the conversation moves from endorsement excitement to structural concern. Because if Clark's brand becomes larger than the league's marketing infrastructure, disciplinary decisions become sensitive. Marketing priorities become delicate. Even officiating optics come under scrutiny. When millions of new viewers tune in specifically for one player, every whistle feels amplified. Every hard foul becomes a storyline. Every perceived lack of protection becomes a debate. The league now operates under a microscope it didn't fully anticipate. And the more Clark's independent brand grows, the more that microscope intensifies. Control doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes gradually. First, sponsors call the player directly. Then, media narratives center around the player instead of the league. Then, contract negotiations take on a different tone. Before long, the institution is reacting instead of leading. That's the control problem. It's not anger. It's not jealousy. It's uncertainty. The uncertainty of navigating a moment where one athlete's commercial engine runs faster than the league's traditional governance model. And once uncertainty enters boardroom discussions, strategies shift. There are already quiet conversations across sports business circles about endorsement rule adjustments, revenue sharing models, and how nil-style autonomy translates at the professional level. Because Clark's rise blurs lines. College NIL deals prepared athletes to operate as independent brands long before turning pro. Now that autonomy has arrived in the WNBA. And it's accelerating. If future stars follow this blueprint, massive personal branding before even finishing a rookie contract, the league's centralized authority will have to adapt quickly. That's not necessarily a threat. Could be an evolution. But evolution is rarely comfortable. Especially for systems built over decades. And this isn't just about the commissioner. It's about institutional momentum. For years, the WNBA's growth strategy was steady, collective, and incremental. Clark's arrival compressed that timeline dramatically. Suddenly, Growth is explosive. Explosive growth attracts investment. But it also exposes fragility. Because when one pillar supports too much weight, the entire structure depends on its stability. That's why this moment feels bigger than a sponsorship. It's a stress test. A test of whether the league can recalibrate around a mega-athlete model without losing its identity. And as corporate partners continue lining up, the control question only becomes more urgent. Because once the market chooses its centerpiece, the institution must decide. Do we align with it fully? Or do we try to rebalance it? Either choice carries consequences. And the next layer of this story makes that even clearer. Numbers don't lie. They don't whisper. They don't exaggerate. They don't pick sides. They simply reveal leverage. And when the WNBA secured a media rights agreement reportedly worth around $2 billion, it was celebrated as a milestone moment. A breakthrough. A validation of years of growth. But here's the part that rarely gets said out loud. Media valuations are projections. They are bets on future audience demand. Networks don't pay historic figures out of generosity. They pay based on data models that estimate how many viewers will tune in, how long they'll stay, and which names will drive that attention. And in 2024, one name consistently drove spikes unlike anything the league had seen before. Caitlin Clark. Her games weren't just regular season matchups. They were events. Ratings jumped. Social media trends ignited. Even opposing arenas saw attendance surges when she came to town. Broadcasters noticed. Sponsors noticed. Investors noticed. That's how leverage quietly forms. If the league's largest broadcast deal in history aligns with the moment a generational commercial star enters the system, it's difficult to separate the two. And that's where the pressure begins. Because if networks are banking on the Clark effect to justify billion-dollar valuations, the league now carries a delicate responsibility. They must prove the product is bigger than one individual. But the market keeps suggesting otherwise. That's the tension. Publicly, the messaging remains balanced. The WNBA is filled with elite talent. Multiple all-stars. Championship contenders. A deep roster of dynamic athletes. All true. But ratings patterns tell a sharper story. Clark's matchups often outperform league averages by dramatic margins. Merchandise sales follow similar trends. Digital engagement spikes align closely with her appearances. When financial data repeatedly centers around one athlete, institutional narratives become harder to maintain. Because investors follow revenue patterns, not press conferences. And that creates an uncomfortable dependency. Imagine being tasked with negotiating future sponsorship packages knowing that a single player's presence materially influences your broadcast value. Imagine knowing that a prolonged injury, trade controversy, or contractual dispute involving that player could impact projected revenue. That's vulnerability. And institutions are built to minimize vulnerability. This is where the concept of too big to discipline begins to surface in quiet conversations. It doesn't mean Clark is above rules. It doesn't mean she seeks special treatment. It means the optics of any conflict involving her now carry amplified consequences. If disciplinary action appears excessive, backlash escalates quickly. If officiating appears inconsistent, debates trend nationally. If marketing exposure shifts away from her too aggressively, viewership metrics might respond immediately. That's leverage without effort. Leverage born purely from demand. The $2 billion deal magnifies that reality. Because now the stakes are higher. Higher than endorsement money. Higher than rookie contracts. This is about long-term broadcast valuation. When billions are on the table, stability becomes paramount. And stability feels fragile when concentrated in one commercial nucleus. The league faces a delicate balancing act. They must elevate Clark because the market demands it. But they must also diversify attention because overconcentration creates risk. That's easier said than done. Markets don't distribute attention evenly. They amplify momentum. And momentum has clearly attached itself to number 22. There's another layer here that rarely gets discussed. Media rights negotiations include projections not just for current stars, but for future growth cycles. Networks likely anticipate multiple years of elevated interest driven by Clark's trajectory. That means her career arc is now intertwined with the league's financial roadmap. Her development, her health, her public image, all indirectly influence billion-dollar projections. That's a heavy burden for any rookie. And it's an even heavier strategic challenge for any commissioner. Because if the league leans too heavily into the Clark brand, critics may accuse it of abandoning its collective identity. If it resists, it risks suppressing the very engine driving its financial expansion. That tension is structural. It's not emotional. It's math. And math rarely negotiates. Consider this scenario. If Clark were to miss extended time, ratings projections might adjust. If she were traded to a smaller market, broadcast appeal might shift. If she became publicly dissatisfied with league decisions, sponsor confidence could waver. Each of those hypotheticals introduces volatility. And volatility is what executives fear most. The $2 billion deal elevated the WNBA into a new financial tier. But it also increased the consequences of instability. Clark's endorsement empire and the media valuation intersect at one critical point: proof of market dominance. Gatorade's commitment signals individual brand value. Broadcast valuations signal league-wide growth. But when both align around one central figure, the hierarchy changes again. Now the league isn't just managing talent. It's managing a commercial ecosystem where one athlete carries disproportionate influence. And influence shifts power silently. That's why the rage narrative, whether exaggerated or not, persists in speculation circles. Because beneath the headlines, there's a deeper anxiety. Anxiety about dependency. Anxiety about long-term control. Anxiety about what happens when an athlete's independent brand becomes resilient enough to withstand institutional pressure. Clark's financial insulation changes traditional power dynamics. If a player earns modest salary but depends heavily on league exposure, institutional leverage remains strong. But when a player's endorsement portfolio rivals or exceeds institutional marketing budgets, that leverage softens. The league can no longer assume compliance based purely on opportunity access. Because the opportunity ecosystem now exists outside its walls. That's new territory. And new territory forces recalibration. The $2 billion deal isn't just a victory. It's a stress test. A test of whether the WNBA can evolve into a league where mega-athletes coexist with centralized governance without destabilizing the structure. So far, the transition has been loud. Ratings are up. Revenue is rising. But behind that momentum sits a strategic question no one can ignore. What happens if the market continues to value Caitlin Clark as an individual brand at levels that rival, or even exceed, the collective brand of the WNBA itself? That's not hypothetical anymore. It's measurable. And measurable realities are the hardest to dismiss. Because once the numbers confirm the power shift, the conversation moves from speculation to strategy. And strategy decisions are coming fast. It didn't take long for the temperature to rise. The physicality, the hard fouls, the shoulder bumps that linger a little too long. At first, it was dismissed as routine. Welcome to the league. Veterans testing a rookie. Standard initiation. But when it keeps happening, game after game, the narrative starts to split. Some fans call it competitive intensity. Others see something deeper. Because when a rookie enters the league already carrying endorsement deals worth more than most careers, dynamics change instantly. She's not just another young player fighting for minutes. She's the face of primetime broadcasts. The headline name on ticket promotions. The athlete whose highlights circulate globally within seconds. That spotlight alters perception. Every hit becomes amplified. Every missed call becomes dissected. And every non-call becomes part of a larger debate. It's not necessarily conspiracy. It's optics. Optics in an era where millions are watching specifically for one player. There's an uncomfortable layer beneath this discussion. If the league overprotects her, critics accuse it of favoritism. If it underprotects her, critics accuse it of negligence. There's no neutral ground. That's the trap of mega-athlete status. Clark's presence doesn't just change commercial math. It changes how games are interpreted. When a routine foul happens to a mid-level player, it passes quietly. When the same contact happens to Clark, social media erupts. Slow-motion replays circulate. Commentators debate tone. Former players weigh in. Engagement spikes. That level of scrutiny creates pressure on officials, on opponents, and on the league office. Opponents face their own internal dynamic. Veterans who have built reputations over years now share the court with someone whose brand dominance arrived instantly. That doesn't automatically create resentment. But it does create contrast. Contrast in earnings. Contrast in media attention. Contrast in how narratives form around every interaction. When Clark gets hit, it's headline material. When she scores, it trends nationally. That kind of attention can feel invasive to competitors who spent seasons fighting for visibility. Again, it's not necessarily jealousy. It's adjustment. Adjustment to a reality where the spotlight is no longer distributed evenly. And then there's the enforcement question. Some analysts have quietly suggested that physical play against Clark has been unusually aggressive. Others argue that she simply handles the ball more and draws contact naturally. Both perspectives exist. But here's what makes the conversation volatile. Perception shapes market reaction. If fans believe the league isn't protecting its biggest star, criticism intensifies. If they believe she's receiving special treatment, backlash shifts in the opposite direction. The WNBA now walks a razor's edge every time she steps onto the court. Because fairness must be visible. And visibility has never been higher. There's also a subtle strategic angle. When one player drives disproportionate attention, opponents know the stakes are different. Stopping her isn't just about winning games. It's about sending messages. About asserting that the league isn't a one-person show. About reminding viewers that competitive balance still exists. That competitive instinct isn't malicious. It's human. No veteran wants to feel overshadowed in her own league. No team wants to be framed as a supporting cast in someone else's highlight reel. So intensity rises. Fouls feel harder. Defensive schemes tighten. Physical presence becomes part of the narrative. And whether intentional or not, that intensity feeds the broader storyline of tension. From the outside, it can look like hostility. From the inside, it may simply be competition amplified by unprecedented exposure. But exposure changes everything. Clark's commercial status adds another layer. When a player earns $50 million off the court, opponents know they're not just playing against a rookie contract. They're playing against a corporate entity. Against a brand machine. Against someone whose highlights fuel national ad campaigns. That psychological difference matters. Because it reframes matchups from routine contests to symbolic moments. Beating Clark becomes headline material. Guarding her successfully trends online. Every defensive stand feels magnified. And that magnification fuels intensity. The league now operates in an environment where routine contact can become national debate within minutes. Officials know it. Teams know it. The front office definitely knows it. That's why the on-court narrative is so delicate. It intersects directly with the commercial narrative. If Clark appears targeted, it feeds the storyline that the system resents her rise. If she dominates without resistance, it feeds the storyline that the league revolves around her. Either extreme fuels controversy. Controversy drives engagement. Engagement drives revenue. But controversy also strains relationships. There's an unspoken question hovering over all of this. Is the physicality purely competitive? Or is it a subconscious reaction to sudden imbalance? It doesn't require malice to create friction. It only requires disparity. And disparity has been visible since the endorsement headlines broke. When one player becomes financially untouchable before proving herself over multiple seasons, it disrupts traditional earning hierarchies. Historically, wealth followed tenure. Now wealth followed momentum. That reversal is jarring. It doesn't need to produce open conflict to create subtle tension. Body language shifts. Post-game comments carry edge. Media questions become sharper. And the spotlight keeps intensifying. Clark's every move now exists within a broader context of power realignment. So when contact happens, it isn't just about basketball. It becomes symbolic. Symbolic of generational change. Symbolic of shifting valuation. Symbolic of who controls the narrative. That's why the on-court tension matters so much. Because it mirrors the off-court tension. The league is adjusting to a reality it hasn't experienced before. A reality where one athlete's presence transforms everything, from ratings to revenue to rivalry intensity. And that transformation isn't clean. It's messy. It's loud. It's debated in real time. The games feel heavier now. Not because the rules changed, but because the stakes did. Every whistle carries subtext. Every hard screen carries commentary. Every competitive moment feeds the larger story of disruption. Clark may not be seeking controversy, but controversy gravitates toward disruption. And disruption is exactly what her arrival represents. The question isn't whether the physicality is intentional. The question is whether the system can adapt to this level of visibility without fracturing under the pressure. Because the hardwood doesn't exist in isolation. It reflects the power dynamics playing out above it. And those dynamics are only getting more complex. Here's where the conversation gets uncomfortable. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Just mathematically uncomfortable. Because when you strip away the highlight reels and endorsement headlines, you're left with a reality that's hard to spin. Caitlin Clark's reported off-court earnings are estimated in the tens of millions. Her WNBA base salary? A fraction of that. And most veteran players in the league. Their entire career earnings don't come close to matching 1 year of Clark's endorsement portfolio. That's not an opinion. That's arithmetic. And arithmetic reshapes locker rooms faster than any speech ever could. For years, WNBA veterans fought publicly for increased salaries, improved travel standards, revenue sharing, and greater respect. They negotiated collective bargaining agreements. They pushed for charter flights. They built the foundation of the league's credibility. Then suddenly, a rookie arrives and secures financial security that bypasses the entire salary structure. It doesn't mean she didn't earn it. It means the economic model just fractured in plain sight. Imagine being a 10-year veteran who helped sustain the league during its leanest years. You sacrificed international seasons. You built your brand slowly. You advocated for pay increases that came incrementally. Now imagine watching a rookie sign endorsement deals worth exponentially more before she's played a full season. That contrast is powerful. Not necessarily resentful, but impossible to ignore. And in professional sports, money equals status. Even if no one says it out loud. There's also the public perception layer. Fans now see a league where the most famous player earns dramatically more from brands than from the league itself. That gap makes the WNBA salary structure look small, even if it's improving. It creates a PR dilemma. How do you argue for league valuation growth when your biggest star's external value eclipses your internal compensation model? That's a messaging challenge. Because Clark's endorsement empire highlights both progress and disparity simultaneously. Progress, because women's sports are finally attracting elite sponsorship money. Disparity, because that money flows unevenly. The wealth gap becomes a storyline of its own. One player operating at a corporate level. Teammates operating under a salary cap system built for collective parity. That's new territory for the WNBA. Historically, the league has emphasized equality and team-first identity. The culture leaned toward shared growth. Clark's financial profile introduces superstar economics into a system designed around balance. And balance doesn't adjust overnight. This creates subtle psychological shifts. If a player earns modest league salary, team structures maintain natural hierarchy. Coaches hold authority. Contracts carry leverage. Fines feel consequential. But when a player's endorsement income dwarfs league compensation, those dynamics soften. A fine becomes symbolic. A suspension carries different financial weight. Public perception becomes more important than internal discipline. Because a player financially insulated by corporate backing doesn't operate under traditional pressure. That changes negotiation psychology. It doesn't make Clark rebellious. It makes her independent. Independence alters power flow. And the front office understands that. There's also the sponsor optics problem. If one athlete commands massive endorsement campaigns while others struggle for visibility, corporate partners may begin concentrating resources rather than distributing them evenly. That creates an even wider gap. The league now faces a fork in the road. It can lean fully into the superstar model, accepting that revenue concentration is part of modern sports. Or it can attempt to redistribute attention to preserve internal harmony. But redistributing attention doesn't guarantee redistributing demand. Markets aren't centrally controlled. They amplify what resonates. And right now, Clark resonates at scale. This isn't the first time sports has faced this dynamic. The NBA experienced similar shifts when individual stars began commanding global brand power beyond league boundaries. But the WNBA is navigating this transformation at a faster pace and earlier stage of financial maturity. That makes the shock sharper. The salary cap system wasn't built for one player's external earnings to eclipse entire team payrolls in perception value. Even if technically separate from league salary, the optics merge. Fans don't distinguish between endorsement dollars and team contracts when evaluating status. They see total wealth. And total wealth creates hierarchy. Inside the locker room, hierarchy can be destabilizing if not managed carefully. Veterans who helped grow the league may feel overshadowed by a narrative that centers on one name. Rookies entering the league may recalibrate their own expectations, believing massive endorsements are now standard rather than exceptional. Agents may adjust negotiation strategies accordingly. The ripple effect spreads quickly. Clark didn't ask to become the symbol of this disparity. But symbols attach themselves to disruption. And disruption has financial fingerprints. There's also a broader labor question emerging quietly. If one player's individual market value is dramatically higher than her league salary, future collective bargaining discussions could become more complex. Do stars push for larger revenue shares? Do endorsement structures influence league negotiations? Does the existence of mega-athlete earnings shift how contracts are framed? Those questions aren't hypothetical anymore. They're inevitable. Because once disparity becomes visible, policy discussions follow. The commissioner now stands at a crossroads. Protect collective balance or embrace superstar economics. Both paths carry consequences. If superstar economics dominate, competitive parity may feel secondary to commercial momentum. If collective balance is enforced too aggressively, market growth could slow. It's a strategic gamble either way. And Clark's $50 million narrative sits at the center of it. What makes this moment even more intense is timing. The league is finally experiencing unprecedented visibility. Record viewership. Expanded sponsorships. Historic media deals. Growth is happening. But growth concentrated around one central figure magnifies pressure. Because sustainability becomes the next question. Can the WNBA evolve into a league where multiple players command mega endorsements? Or is this a singular moment tied uniquely to Clark's timing and cultural impact? The answer matters. If multiple stars rise to similar commercial heights, the imbalance levels out naturally. If Clark remains an outlier, the structural tension remains concentrated. That's why the salary gap isn't just about money. It's about precedent. Precedent shapes future expectations. And expectations shape negotiation leverage. Clark's financial profile signals to the next generation that global endorsement power is attainable before a second contract. That's transformative. But transformation always stresses existing systems. The WNBA now operates in an era where the face of the league may be financially insulated beyond traditional institutional reach. That changes everything about how authority flows. It doesn't mean collapse. It means recalibration. But recalibration requires clarity. And clarity requires acknowledging what's already obvious. The salary gap isn't theoretical. It's visible. And visible gaps demand strategic response. Because once players, fans, and sponsors see the disparity, they don't forget it. They build around it. And that build-out is already happening. If the Gatorade deal was the spark, the Nike layer is the accelerant. Because one major endorsement signals momentum. Two signals permanence. And when you combine a reported 8-figure Nike partnership with a massive Gatorade commitment, you're no longer looking at a breakout rookie. You're looking at infrastructure. Nike isn't reactive. Nike is predictive. The brand doesn't attach itself lightly. It evaluates longevity, cultural resonance, global scalability, narrative durability. When Nike locks in, it's usually because it sees a multi-year commercial runway. That matters. Because now Clark isn't just sponsored. She's institutionally backed by two of the largest sports brands in the world. That changes risk. It changes how secure her platform is. It changes how insulated she becomes from league dependency. Historically, young players relied on league visibility to elevate endorsement value. Exposure flowed through team marketing, national broadcasts, and league promotion campaigns. Clark flipped that dynamic. Her brand momentum started before she ever stepped onto a WNBA court. College dominance. National television appearances. Record-breaking viewership. By the time she entered the league, she wasn't building from scratch. She was importing an audience. And Nike and Gatorade recognized that imported audience as a ready-made market. That's rare. Most rookies grow into endorsement stature over time. Clark arrived with endorsement gravity already attached. That gravity shifts power. Because when a player's financial foundation is supported by multinational corporations, she operates on a different stability level. If controversy arises, brand teams manage messaging. If negotiations stall, brand revenue continues. If the league hesitates, her platform remains intact. That's autonomy, not rebellion. Autonomy. And autonomy makes traditional authority nervous. It doesn't matter whether the commissioner is furious or calm behind closed doors. What matters is structural reality. Clark is financially positioned in a way no previous WNBA rookie has been. That creates a dynamic the league hasn't navigated before. A player who is, for practical purposes, commercially unfireable. Think about that. If a star's salary depends entirely on league contracts, disciplinary leverage is straightforward. But if a star's endorsement portfolio rivals or exceeds institutional marketing budgets, the leverage equation changes. Disciplining that player becomes a reputational calculation. Because backlash doesn't just come from fans. It can come from corporate partners. And corporate partners operate at global scale. The Nike factor adds another layer. Nike doesn't just sign athletes. It builds narratives around them. Campaigns. Signature products. Long-term storytelling arcs. If Clark's brand continues expanding under Nike's umbrella, her identity becomes embedded in a broader sports culture narrative. That's bigger than a season. Bigger than a team. Bigger than a league. That's what makes this moment historic. The WNBA is entering the mega-athlete era faster than anticipated. In the NBA, this transition took decades. In the WNBA, it happened almost instantly. Clark's arrival compressed time. And compressed transitions are messy. There's also the symbolic shift. For years, the WNBA operated more like a company town model. Players were grateful for the platform. League branding led the narrative. Individual brands grew within defined boundaries. Clark's financial insulation signals the end of that mentality. She doesn't need to ask permission to be global. She already is. And that reality forces evolution. Because if future stars replicate this model, building massive college nil followings, entering the league with established corporate partnerships, the WNBA's centralized marketing influence diminishes naturally. The balance of power moves outward. From headquarters to athlete-led ecosystems. That's not inherently negative. It can lead to explosive growth. But it requires new governance thinking, new revenue-sharing conversations, new endorsement alignment strategies. Because the old framework wasn't designed for athletes whose brand equity outpaces institutional marketing reach. Clark's Nike association also signals something else. Global scalability. Nike operates internationally. Gatorade operates internationally. If Clark's appeal extends beyond domestic audiences, the WNBA benefits indirectly, but it also risks losing narrative control internationally. International audiences may connect more with the athlete than the league. That's subtle, but important. Because leagues rely on brand loyalty. Mega athletes rely on personal connection. If fans follow Clark wherever she goes, not just within league context, loyalty begins to concentrate. That concentration can be powerful or destabilizing. The Nike layer confirms that this isn't a temporary hype cycle. It's a strategic investment. Corporate backing at that level implies belief in longevity. Longevity shifts expectations. Now the league must ask itself, is it prepared for a decade of Clark-centric commercial dominance? Because if the answer is yes, alignment becomes crucial. If the answer is uncertain, resistance could surface in subtle ways. The physicality narrative, the marketing distribution decisions, the scheduling debates. All of it intersects with this larger autonomy question. Clark isn't just a player rising through the ranks. She's a brand operating in parallel with the league. Parallel structures create tension, especially when one structure moves faster than the other. And make no mistake, her brand infrastructure is accelerating. Signature shoes are possible. Expanded campaigns are likely. International tours could follow. Each step widens the gap between institutional pace and individual momentum. That's why the Nike factor matters so much. It solidifies the shift. It tells the market this isn't temporary. It tells the league this isn't contained. And it tells future players that the blueprint has changed. The company town era is fading. The platform era has arrived. Athletes as independent entities. Athletes as corporations. Athletes as negotiating powers beyond salary cap constraints. Clark may not have intended to trigger that transformation. But transformation doesn't require intention. It requires momentum. And momentum is exactly what she has. Now the league must adapt. Because autonomy at that scale doesn't reverse. It expands. And expansion forces decisions. Strategic decisions. Financial decisions. Governance decisions. The Nike layer wasn't just another endorsement. It was confirmation. Confirmation that the power shift isn't speculative. It's operational. And once operational, it can't be undone. Here's where it gets delicate. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Structural. Because once an athlete's independent earnings reach this level, the next logical conversation isn't about commercials. It's about rules. Professional leagues are built on frameworks. Salary caps. Endorsement guidelines. Marketing alignment clauses. Conduct policies. Revenue sharing agreements. Those frameworks assume one thing. The league holds the central platform. But what happens when the platform begins operating outside league walls? Clark's financial autonomy introduces a quiet dilemma. If her endorsement income continues scaling at historic levels, future negotiations, both individual and collective, will carry different leverage weight. And leverage always influences policy. Consider this. If the WNBA were to explore tighter endorsement alignment rules in the future, ensuring league sponsors receive priority exposure, how would that interact with a player whose personal sponsors operate at equal or larger scale? Would restrictions even be practical? Would they withstand scrutiny? Would they create friction with corporate partners investing tens of millions? That's the rulebook dilemma. The league must preserve institutional authority without appearing to suppress individual success. Because any perception of suppressing growth, especially growth that elevates women's sports overall, would trigger backlash instantly. Clark's brand isn't just large. It's public. Highly public. Every move is tracked. Every endorsement discussed. Every headline amplified. That visibility makes policy decisions risky. Even subtle adjustments could be interpreted as targeted. That's why adaptation must be careful. The old governance model assumed gradual superstar emergence. Clark's arrival compressed the timeline. She didn't slowly accumulate leverage. She arrived with it. And that forces the league into reactive positioning. There's another layer here most fans don't see. Collective bargaining agreements. Future CBA negotiations may reflect this new era. If star players demonstrate the ability to command massive independent revenue streams, they may push for structural flexibility that accommodates that autonomy. That doesn't mean conflict. It means evolution. But evolution requires negotiation. And negotiation requires acknowledgement of power balance. Clark's financial insulation shifts that balance. If a player is less dependent on league salary for financial security, her bargaining position strengthens. She can advocate more freely. She can negotiate more aggressively. She can prioritize brand alignment decisions without fearing financial instability. That's empowerment. But empowerment at scale changes institutional tone. Because leagues traditionally negotiate from the standpoint of opportunity provision. If opportunity provision becomes less financially critical to a player's stability, leverage redistributes. That redistribution doesn't mean chaos. But it does mean recalibration. There's also the legal dimension. If endorsement restrictions were ever perceived as limiting earning potential unfairly, legal scrutiny could follow. Professional sports operate within labor law frameworks. Restricting high-value athletes too aggressively risks unintended consequences. Especially when corporate partners are involved. Nike and Gatorade don't operate casually. Their contracts include clauses, marketing obligations, and long-term projections. If league policies conflict with those commitments, friction emerges. Quietly at first, then publicly if unresolved. That's why this moment feels like a golden cage. Clark's success brings unprecedented revenue attention. But that same success reduces the league's unilateral control. The institution benefits from her growth. But it also becomes more dependent on her stability. Dependency reshapes governance thinking. Now imagine the next wave of athletes studying this blueprint. College players building nil empires. Entering the league already aligned with major brands. Expecting autonomy from day one. Clark may be the first at this scale. She won't be the last. That's the real long-term impact. The rulebook dilemma isn't about punishing success. It's about adapting to a future where athletes operate as parallel enterprises. Parallel enterprises require coordination, not command and control structures. Coordination is harder. It demands transparency. It demands shared incentives. It demands trust. And trust must be mutual. The league must trust that mega-athletes won't fracture collective identity. Athletes must trust that the league won't restrict growth out of institutional anxiety. That balance is fragile, especially under constant public scrutiny. Every scheduling decision, marketing allocation, and officiating controversy now feeds into a broader power narrative. Because the market sees the numbers. And once numbers reach this magnitude, speculation intensifies. Is the league embracing the shift? Or resisting it quietly? Are policies evolving? Or staying rigid? These questions circulate because power realignments are rarely smooth. The Wnba stands at a governance crossroads. It can modernize its approach to superstar economics. Or it can attempt to maintain a traditional framework in a rapidly changing environment. One path embraces athlete as platform models fully. The other prioritizes institutional cohesion above individual acceleration. Both paths carry risk. But standing still carries the most risk of all. Because momentum doesn't pause. Clark's brand isn't waiting. Sponsors aren't waiting. Viewership growth isn't waiting. The rulebook must evolve alongside reality. Or reality will outpace it. That's the quiet tension behind the scenes. Not rage. Not jealousy. Structural pressure. Pressure to adapt quickly enough to harness momentum without losing authority. And adaptation is coming. Because once the power shift becomes measurable, ignoring it is no longer an option. The mega-athlete era in the Wnba isn't theoretical anymore. It's operational. And operational shifts force policy decisions sooner rather than later. The next chapter won't be about endorsements. It will be about alignment. Alignment between individual autonomy and institutional governance. And whether that alignment strengthens the league, or strains it further, will define the next decade. The foundation has cracked open. Now the architects must decide how to rebuild around it. This is no longer about one deal. It's no longer about one rookie. It's about direction. The WNBA is standing at a crossroads that will shape the next half-century of women's professional basketball. And the decision it makes won't be written in a press release. It will be written in how it responds to power. Because make no mistake, power has shifted. Not completely. Not uncontrollably. But measurably. Caitlin Clark's $50 million narrative, layered with Nike backing and record viewership, has forced the league into a new era whether it planned for it or not. The question now is simple. Does the league build around the empire? Or does it try to rebalance it? If it builds around it, the strategy becomes clear. Lean into the mega-athlete model. Market aggressively. Accept that the league has a gravitational center and use it to pull new fans, new sponsors, and new global audiences into the ecosystem. That path embraces reality. But it also concentrates identity. Because if the league becomes too closely tied to one name, long-term sustainability depends on that name's continued dominance and health. That's risk. If it tries to rebalance it, the strategy becomes more cautious. Elevate other stars. Distribute marketing exposure evenly. Reinforce collective identity. That path protects institutional narrative. But it risks resisting organic market momentum. And markets don't respond well to forced symmetry. The fans have already voted with their attention. Television numbers. Arena sellouts. Social media engagement. Corporate sponsors followed. The money followed. The shift is not theoretical. It's measurable. And measurable shifts demand strategic response. There's another uncomfortable layer here. Clark doesn't need to challenge the league openly to hold influence. Her influence is passive. It exists because of demand. Because fans tune in for her. Because sponsors invest around her. Because networks project growth around her. That passive leverage is the most powerful kind. It doesn't require confrontation. It simply exists. And institutions must adapt to it. The commissioner's office now faces a legacy-defining moment. Does it become the leadership team that facilitated the most explosive growth period in league history? Or the leadership team that struggled to adjust to a new economic reality? History remembers pivots. The NBA faced similar crossroads when superstar culture exploded. The NFL navigated franchise quarterback valuation shifts. Every major league eventually confronts a moment where individual brand power expands faster than institutional control. The successful leagues adapt. They modernize governance. They create revenue-sharing models that align incentives. They protect competitive balance without suppressing superstar momentum. The unsuccessful ones resist until the market forces change anyway. The WNBA has an opportunity few leagues ever get. Explosive growth at a pivotal cultural moment. Clark represents more than scoring averages. She represents timing. Timing with nil evolution. Timing with media fragmentation. Timing with social media amplification. Timing with corporate interest in women's sports reaching historic highs. That alignment is rare. But alignment must be managed carefully. If tension escalates publicly, whether through officiating debates, marketing disputes, or endorsement policy adjustments, perception becomes the battleground. And perception moves faster than policy. The league must ensure that perception aligns with progress. Because once fans sense internal resistance to growth, narratives spiral quickly. But if the league embraces this era fully, positioning Clark not as a threat to institutional authority but as proof of institutional success, the momentum compounds. That framing matters. Is she bigger than the league? Or is she proof the league has finally reached its potential? Those two interpretations lead to very different futures. The reality likely sits somewhere in between. Clark's rise highlights both opportunity and vulnerability. Opportunity to accelerate growth beyond historical ceilings. Vulnerability in how concentrated that growth currently appears. The smartest path forward may not be choosing one over the other. It may be integration, aligning Clark's independent brand expansion with league-wide elevation strategies, ensuring that her commercial success opens doors for others rather than widening gaps permanently. That requires coordination at a level the league hasn't needed before. Coordination between corporate partners and league sponsors. Coordination between marketing campaigns and scheduling decisions. Coordination between governance rules and superstar autonomy. It's complex. But complexity is the price of evolution. The easy days are over. The incremental growth era has ended. The WNBA is now operating under mega-athlete economics. And mega-athlete economics come with amplified stakes. The $50 million deal wasn't just a headline. It was a signal flare. A flare that illuminated every structural question the league must now confront. Who negotiates power? Who controls narrative? Who sets policy in an era where athletes carry multinational brand backing? These aren't hypothetical debates. They are live strategic considerations. Clark will continue playing. She will continue scoring. She will continue signing deals. The momentum won't slow. The only variable is institutional response. And that response will determine whether this moment becomes the foundation of a golden age, or the beginning of internal friction that limits long-term stability. The market has already chosen excitement. Now leadership must choose alignment. Before we close this out, let's talk directly for a second. If you're watching this, you're seeing history unfold in real time. You're watching women's sports reach valuation numbers that critics once called impossible. You're watching power shift publicly and structurally. And here's the thing, the number of subscribers on this channel is still very low compared to the size of this conversation. If you care about these deeper breakdowns, not just the headlines, but the leverage, the structure, the real business dynamics behind what's happening, this is the place where we analyze it clearly and without noise. So here's what I need you to do. Subscribe to the channel. Not casually. Intentionally. Because subscriber growth directly impacts how the algorithm distributes long-form, analytical content like this. It signals to YouTube that discussions around women's sports economics deserve amplification. Like the video. That engagement metric increases session authority and boosts visibility in recommendation systems. And leave a comment. Tell me this. Do you think the WNBA should fully embrace the Clark mega-athlete era, or do you think they should rebalance the spotlight to protect long-term stability? Your feedback shapes future content. This story isn't over. The power shift is still unfolding. And the next move, from the league, from the sponsors, from Clark herself, will define everything. Because the revolution isn't coming. It's already here. And whether the system adapts smoothly or fractures under pressure will determine the next 50 years of women's basketball.